The Anderson family had always prided itself on authenticity. When they moved to the small Swedish-American community of Frostholm, Minnesota, they were determined to celebrate Christmas the proper way, the old way. Sarah Anderson spent weeks researching obscure Scandinavian traditions, her laptop glowing late into December nights as she scrolled through digitized folklore archives and obscure academic papers. "Listen to this," she told her husband Mark one evening, her eyes bright with excitement. In medieval Sweden, they had something called the Julbock, the Yule goat. It wasn't just a decoration. It was supposed to demand gifts and food going door to door. Some sources say it was a person in disguise, but others— She paused dramatically. Others say it was something else entirely. Mark looked up from his phone, mildly interested. Something else? The tradition predates Christianity by centuries. The goat was connected to Thor's chariot. Some folklorists think it was originally a spirit, something that came during the darkest days to ensure the community gave proper offerings. She scrolled further. There are accounts of entire villages participating in elaborate rituals to satisfy the Yule goat. And in some places, the tradition just stopped. Abruptly. No explanation in the records. Their daughter Emma, 13 and perpetually eye-rolling, groaned from the couch. "Mom, please don't make us do something weird this year. Remember the marzipan incident?" "That was culturally significant," Sarah protested. "And this won't be weird, I promise. I just thought we could build an authentic Julbock, a proper one, with straw and everything." Mrs. Lindgren at the Historical Society said there's a specific way to construct it. She even has old photographs. What Sarah didn't mention, what she'd only glimpsed in the margins of a particularly old text, were the warnings. Small notations in faded ink, partially obscured by water damage. The binding must be red thread only. Never construct during the new moon. The number of straw bundles must be exact, 13 for containment. Mrs. Lindgren was delighted to help. The elderly woman had moved to Frostholm from Sweden as a child, and her memories of the old traditions were vivid, if somewhat fragmented. "My farmer, my grandmother, she knew how to make the Julbock properly," she said, her accent still thick after 70 years in America. "But she always said some traditions are better left in the old country." "Why is that?" Sarah asked, already pulling out her notebook. Mrs. Lindgren's expression darkened for just a moment. "Because some things, they work differently here. The boundaries aren't the same. In Sweden, in the old villages, everyone knew the rules. Everyone kept them. But here?" She shook her head. "Here, people forget why rules exist." Despite the ominous warning, Mrs. Lindgren provided detailed instructions. The Julbock should be built on December 13th, St. Lucia's Day, when the darkness is deepest. It required straw from a specific type of rye, bound with red thread in a particular pattern. The frame must be made from birch wood, never cut, but only gathered from fallen branches. And most importantly, once constructed, the Julbock must be fed every night until Christmas with traditional offerings, fresh bread, salt, and a cup of mulled wine. "Why does a straw goat need food?" Emma asked skeptically as they gathered materials. "It's symbolic," Sarah explained, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. "The goat represents the spirit of the old traditions. By feeding it, we're honoring our ancestors and the coming of the new year." They built the Julbock in the corner of their living room, a magnificent construction nearly 4 feet tall, with curved straw horns and legs that seemed almost too articulated for something made of dried grass. Mark had to admit, despite his initial skepticism, it was impressive. The craftsmanship required was far more complex than he'd anticipated. The way the straw had to be bundled, twisted, and bound created an almost muscular appearance. In the flickering light of their fireplace, it cast strange, elongated shadows. "It looks like it's watching us," Emma said quietly that first night. "It's just the angle of the light," Mark replied, but he repositioned a lamp anyway. They began the feeding ritual that evening. Sarah placed fresh bread, a small bowl of salt, and a cup of warm wine in front of the Julbock, feeling slightly foolish but also strangely excited. "To the old ways," she said, improvising, "to the traditions that connect us to our ancestors." The next morning, the food was gone. "One of you is messing with me," Sarah said at breakfast, eyeing Mark and Emma suspiciously. Both insisted they weren't. Mark pointed out that their ancient cat, Freya, had probably eaten the bread. Emma suggested mice. Sarah let it go, but she felt a small thrill. Maybe the ritual was working on some psychological level, creating an atmosphere, a sense of connection to the past. They continued the feeding each night, and each morning the offerings were gone. But other things began happening too. Small things at first. The Julbock would be in a slightly different position, turned a few inches or moved closer to the window. The straw seemed fresher somehow, less brittle, and the smell in the living room changed from the expected musty odor of dried grass to something else, something earthy and alive, like a barn in summer. "Mom, I don't like it anymore," Emma said on the fifth night. "Can we put it in the basement?" "Don't be silly, it's just a decoration." But Emma couldn't articulate what she felt, the sensation of being observed, of intelligence behind those twisted straw features. She started avoiding the living room, doing her homework at the kitchen table instead. Mark noticed it too, but said nothing. He'd wake in the night and hear sounds from downstairs, not footsteps exactly, but a dry rustling, like something large shifting position. Once he came down for water, and could have sworn the Julbock was standing in a different corner entirely. But in the darkness, with only the streetlight filtering through the curtains, he couldn't be sure. On December 20th, 5 days before Christmas, Sarah woke to find muddy hoofprints on the hardwood floor. They led from the living room to the kitchen, where the refrigerator stood open. Every piece of bread was gone. Every vegetable with roots, carrots, potatoes, turnips had been taken. And in the sink, inexplicably, was a pile of chewed straw. "This has to stop," Mark said firmly. "Someone is breaking in, or there's an animal loose in the house, or what?" Sarah's voice was shrill. She'd barely slept, spending the night researching, trying to find something she'd missed. "Or we built something we shouldn't have? Is that what you're going to say?" "I'm saying we're getting rid of it. Today." But when they went to the living room, the Julbock was perfect. No disturbed straw, no signs of movement. It stood exactly where they'd placed it, majestic and still. And beside it, arranged carefully on the floor, were the offerings from the previous night, untouched. "I don't understand," Sarah whispered. Emma understood, in the way that children sometimes do. She understood that they'd called something, and it had answered. That night, she locked her bedroom door. The Julbock began to grow. Not dramatically, not in ways that could be definitively measured, but each morning it seemed slightly larger, its horns more pronounced, its legs sturdier. The straw darkened from golden yellow to something closer to brown, almost like fur, and its eyes, 2 knots where the head met the neck, began to gleam in certain light as if they were wet. Mrs. Lindgren came by on December 22nd, invited for tea. She stopped in the doorway of the living room, her cup clattering against the saucer. "Vad har du gjort?" she whispered. "What have you done?" "We followed your instructions exactly," Sarah said defensively. "Every detail." "No." Mrs. Lindgren's face was pale. "No, you couldn't have, because I didn't tell you the last part, the most important part." She turned to Sarah, her eyes filling with tears. "You must unmake it before Christmas Day, before the sun rises on the 25th. That's when it completes. That's when it becomes." "Becomes what?" "Real." They tried to burn it that night. Mark dragged the Julbock to the backyard, doused it in lighter fluid, and struck a match. The flames caught immediately, leaping high and hot. The straw should have been consumed in minutes, but as they watched, the fire seemed to slide off the Julbock like water. The straw blackened but didn't burn, and in the heart of the flames, they saw it move, a deliberate, willful movement, stepping out of the fire with its straw completely intact. "Inside," Mark said quietly. "Now." They locked every door and window. Mark even nailed boards across the back door. They huddled in the master bedroom, Emma between her parents, all three watching the clock. 2 more days until Christmas. 2 more days until sunrise on the 25th. The Julbock was patient. They heard it that night, testing the doors, scratching at the windows, the sound of straw against glass. Once, Emma looked out and saw it standing in the backyard, illuminated by the motion sensor lights. It was massive now, easily 7 feet tall. Its horns curved wickedly, and its legs bent at too many joints. But worst of all was its mouth. Where there had been no mouth, now there was an opening in the straw, dark and deep, lined with what looked horribly like teeth. On Christmas Eve, Mrs. Lindgren came back with a book, ancient, bound in leather that might not have been cowhide. "There's only one way," she said. "You must feed it properly, the true offering." "What offering?" Sarah demanded. "We gave it everything." "Not everything. The Yule goat doesn't want bread or wine. Those are symbolic, meant to satisfy it, to send it away content. But you called it without knowing how to bind it. Now it's woken fully, and it wants what it's always wanted, what it demanded in the old days." Mark's voice was hollow. "What did it demand?" Mrs. Lindgren opened the book to a page marked with a faded red ribbon. The text was in Old Swedish, but she translated, "The Julbock comes in the darkest time, when the sun is weak and the world is cold. It comes to test the strength of the community, to ensure they can survive the winter. And so it demands the strongest among them. A volunteer, someone willing to join the goat, to become part of the old cycle. They would wear the skin or the straw and become the Julbock for the next year, ensuring the harvest, ensuring the survival." "That's barbaric," Sarah breathed. "That's survival. And in places where the tradition was respected, where someone always volunteered, the communities thrived. Perfect harvests, no sickness. But in places where they refused..." Mrs. Lindgren closed the book. "The Julbock took anyway. Usually the children, the young and weak." Emma whimpered. "There has to be another way," Mark said. "This is America. This is the 21st century. We don't..." The sound of splintering wood interrupted him. The Julbock had breached the back door. They could hear it moving through the house, the rustle of straw, the click of hooves on hardwood, and underneath it all, a sound like breathing, raspy and deep. It was searching. "We have to decide," Mrs. Lindgren said urgently. "Someone must volunteer, or it will choose, and it always chooses the child." Sarah and Mark looked at each other, a horrible understanding passing between them. Then Sarah stood. "No!" Mark grabbed her arm, but she pulled away. "I'm the one who brought it here. I'm the one who insisted." She kissed Emma's forehead, then Mark's lips. "Take care of each other and never, never celebrate the old ways again." She walked out of the bedroom before they could stop her. The Julbock stood at the bottom of the stairs. Up close, it was magnificent and terrible. The straw had become something else. Not quite fur, not quite hair, but alive in a way that defied nature. Its eyes, those knots in the straw, gleamed with ancient intelligence. And when it opened its mouth, Sarah saw darkness that went down and down, into depths that shouldn't exist in something made of dried grass and birchwood. "I volunteer," she said, her voice shaking. "I offer myself. Take me, and let my family go." The Julbock considered her. Then slowly, deliberately, it bowed its great horned head. What happened next, Mark couldn't fully see from the top of the stairs. He held Emma close, covering her eyes as Sarah walked forward into the Julbock's embrace. There was a sound like wind through wheat fields, a flash of that earthy summer barn smell, and then silence. When Mark finally opened his eyes, the Julbock was gone. In its place stood Sarah, but not Sarah. She stood differently, her spine too straight, her head tilted at an angle that was almost animal. When she looked up at him, her eyes were still her eyes, but behind them was something else, something ancient and patient and hungry. "Mommy," Emma whispered. Sarah, or the thing wearing Sarah, smiled. It was almost her smile. "It's all right, sweetheart. Everything's all right now. I need to go away for a while, until next year. But I'll make sure you're both safe. That's what the Julbock does. It protects its people." She walked to the door, moving with an odd, stuttering gait. Before she left, she turned back one last time. "Feed it properly next year," she said, but it wasn't clear if she was warning them or instructing them. "Or I'll have to come back." Then she was gone, disappearing into the December darkness. Mark and Emma left Frostholm the next day, driving through the night to get as far away as possible. They never spoke about what happened. They never celebrated Christmas again, or at least not with any traditional decorations. But sometimes, on cold December nights, Emma wakes to the smell of summer barns and sun-dried hay. And if she looks out her window, no matter where they've moved, no matter how far they've run, she can see a figure standing at the edge of the trees, tall and impossibly still, with curved horns silhouetted against the winter sky. Watching, waiting, protecting. The Julbock always keeps its promises, and Sarah Anderson had volunteered for a full cycle, 1 year. But in the old traditions, time works differently. A year could be a lifetime could be forever. And every Christmas Eve, Mark sets out offerings of bread, salt, and wine, not in celebration, but in appeasement. Because he knows that somewhere out there, his wife walks in a body made of straw and ancient hunger, ensuring their protection the only way the old ways know how. The Yule goat must be fed, one way or another. The first time Katie Hoffman heard about the Belsnickel, she was 7 years old, sitting in her grandmother's kitchen in rural Pennsylvania, shelling peas into a ceramic bowl. Her Oma spoke in that particular way old people do, when they're not entirely sure if they're telling a story or issuing a warning. "In the old country, we didn't have your fat, jolly Santa Claus," Oma said, her gnarled fingers working through the peas with practiced efficiency. "We had the Belsnickel. He came before Christmas, sometimes weeks before, to check on the children, to see if they'd been good." "Like Santa's list?" Katie asked, imagining something cheerful and red-suited. 9. Oma's voice was sharp. "Not like that at all. The Belsnickel didn't check a list. He checked you. He looked into your heart, into your soul, and he knew. He knew every lie, every theft, every moment of cruelty. And if you'd been bad..." She paused, her pale blue eyes fixing on Katie with an intensity that made the little girl squirm. "He would beat you with his switch. Sometimes just a few strikes to teach you. But sometimes, if you'd been very, very bad, he would take you." "Take me where?" Oma's expression darkened. "That's the question, isn't it? No one who was taken ever came back to tell us." 23 years later, Katie had mostly forgotten that conversation. Or rather, she'd filed it away with all the other vaguely disturbing folk tales that European grandmothers seemed to specialize in. She'd moved to Pittsburgh, become a social worker, married a kind man named David, and was now 8 months pregnant with their first child. But when her Oma died that November, Katie found herself driving back to the old farmhouse in Schaeferstown to help settle the estate. The house was exactly as she remembered: dark wood, low ceilings, and that peculiar smell of old fabric and coal dust that seemed permanently embedded in the walls. In the attic, while sorting through boxes of photographs and documents, Katie found a leather journal. The entries were in German, written in Oma's careful, old-fashioned script. Katie's German was rusty, but she could make out enough to understand that it wasn't a diary. It was a record of the Belsnickel's visits. The entries went back decades, to when Oma was a child in Germany, and then continued after her immigration to America. Each entry was dated, always in early December, and each contained a list of names, children's names. Next to each name was a single word: gut, good, or schlecht, bad. And next to the bad entries, there was often a number, the number of strikes with the switch. But some entries had no number. Instead, they had a symbol, a crude drawing that looked like a doorway or a portal, with a stick figure being pulled through it. And next to those symbols, the names were crossed out. Katie felt her baby kick hard, as if responding to her sudden anxiety. She flipped through the pages, noticing something disturbing. The last entry was from December 1998, 25 years ago, right around the time Oma had stopped inviting family to the farmhouse for Christmas. The entry was different from the others. Instead of multiple names, there was only one: Hannah Hoffman, Katie's aunt, her father's sister, the aunt she'd never met, who'd supposedly run away as a teenager and was never heard from again. Next to Hannah's name was the symbol, the doorway, and beneath it, Oma had written in shaking script, "Ich konnte sie nicht retten. Nahm sie. Meine Schuld. I couldn't save her. He took her. My fault." Katie's hands trembled as she turned the page. The rest of the journal was blank except for the very last page, where Oma had written something recent. The ink was different, the handwriting more wavering with age. The Belsnickel comes when called. The old families knew how to summon him, how to direct his judgment. We brought him with us from the old country, thinking we could leave the bad parts behind and keep only the fear that made children behave. But you cannot control judgment once it begins. You cannot tell truth to be selective. The Belsnickel sees everything, and he punishes according to his own measure. I called him for 60 years, thinking I was protecting the community, teaching children to be good. But Hannah showed me the truth, that he doesn't punish childish mischief. He punishes the soul's darkness, and some darkness we cannot see until he reveals it. I stopped calling him. I broke the chain. But the Belsnickel doesn't forget. He knows where he's been summoned. He knows where he's owed, and debts in the old ways pass down through blood. Katie, if you're reading this, if you found this journal, then I am gone and you are in the house. Do not be here in December. Do not let your child be born here. The Belsnickel will come on December 6th, as he always has. He will come because this house called him for so long that he considers it his territory. And he will judge. Katie, Liebling, you must leave. You must. The entry ended abruptly, the pen trailing off the page as if Oma had been interrupted or had become too weak to continue. Katie closed the journal, her heart pounding. It was December 2nd, 4 days until the 6th. She should leave. Pack up, drive back to Pittsburgh, and forget this superstitious nonsense. But she'd already committed to staying through the weekend to meet with the estate lawyer on Monday. And besides, it was just a story. Belsnickel was a folk character, a way to scare children into behaving. He wasn't real. But that night, as Katie lay in the old bedroom that had once been her father's, she heard something on the stairs. Not quite footsteps, more like the rustle of heavy fabric and the tap, tap, tap of something wooden striking the floor in rhythm, a walking stick or a switch. She held her breath, one hand on her swollen belly, and listened. The sounds stopped outside her door. In the gap beneath the door, she could see the hallway light being blocked by something standing there, waiting. Hello? Her voice came out as a whisper. No response, but she heard breathing, raspy and deliberate, like someone who'd walked a long distance in cold air. Is someone there? The breathing stopped. Then, in a voice that sounded like dry leaves and winter wind, something spoke. Bist du gut oder schlecht? Are you good or bad? Katie's blood froze. She couldn't answer, couldn't move. The pregnancy made her feel trapped, heavy, unable to run even if her muscles would obey. The thing outside her door waited for a long moment, then moved away, the tap, tap, tap receding down the stairs. Katie didn't sleep that night. When dawn finally came, she searched the house frantically for any sign of an intruder, but found nothing. No forced entry, no footprints, nothing disturbed. She called David, nearly hysterical, and he promised to drive out immediately. But a winter storm was moving in, and the roads were already getting bad. He might not make it until tomorrow. Just leave, David urged over the phone. Drive to a hotel, get out of there. But Katie's water broke as they were speaking. The stress, the fear, the baby's position. Everything came together in one terrifying moment. She was going into premature labor, and the nearest hospital was 30 miles away, on increasingly dangerous roads. She called 911, but the dispatcher's voice was crackling with static. The storm was worse than predicted. They'd send an ambulance, but it might be an hour or more. Could she wait? Did she have someone with her? Katie was alone in the farmhouse, in labor, with 4 days until December 6th. Except it wasn't 4 days anymore. In her panic, she'd lost track of time. She looked at her phone. December 5th, 11:47 p.m. 13 minutes until the Belsnickel's night. The contractions were coming hard and fast, too fast for a first baby. Something was wrong. Katie stumbled downstairs, trying to gather supplies, trying to remember what she'd learned in childbirth class. But the pain was overwhelming, and fear made her clumsy. At midnight exactly, every light in the house went out. Katie stood in the kitchen, gripping the counter, lit only by the dim glow of the snow-reflected moonlight through the windows. And she heard it again, the tap, tap, tap of the walking stick, but this time from outside, approaching the front door. The knock, when it came, was thunderous. 3 heavy blows that shook the door in its frame. Belsnickel kommt, the voice called, traditional words that German children once knew to fear. Belsnickel comes. Katie wanted to hide, to run, but another contraction dropped her to her knees. She heard the front door open, though she knew she'd locked it, and then the tap, tap, tap entering the house. The Belsnickel was nothing like the folk costume performers at Pennsylvania Dutch festivals. This wasn't a man in tattered furs with a comedic mask. This was something older, something that existed in the spaces between folklore and nightmare. He was tall, impossibly tall, his head nearly scraping the low ceiling. His clothes were a patchwork of furs, some recognizable as animal, others not. His face was wrapped in strips of bark and leather, with only his eyes visible, eyes that gleamed with an intelligence that was utterly inhuman. In one hand, he carried a bundle of switches, bound together with what looked like human hair. In the other, he carried a sack that moved. Something inside the sack was alive. Bist du gut oder schlecht? He asked again, moving closer with that terrible tap, tap, tap. Katie couldn't speak. She could barely breathe through the pain. The baby was coming now, right now, and she was alone with this thing that should not exist. The Belsnickel tilted his head, studying her with those ancient eyes. Then he knelt, moving with a rustling of furs and a smell of winter forest and old blood, and placed one hand on her swollen belly. His touch was cold, but not ungentle. Katie felt something like electricity pass through her, a sensation of being read, of being opened up and examined at every level of her being, every lie she'd ever told, every time she'd been cruel, every moment of selfishness or anger or hate. The Belsnickel saw it all, weighed it all, judged it all. But he also saw the other things. The times she'd stayed late to help a struggling family. The nights she'd talked a suicidal teenager down from the edge. The endless patience with her mother's dementia. The love for David. The fierce, protective love for the child currently trying to enter the world. The Belsnickel made a sound, something between a grunt and a hum. Then he reached into his sack. Katie wanted to scream, wanted to fight, but the contraction had her paralyzed. She could only watch as his hand emerged from the sack holding not a weapon, but a bundle of clean cloth. He spread the cloth on the floor beside her, then, with surprising gentleness, helped her lie down on it. "Du bist gut," he said quietly. "You are good. Aber das Haus ist verflucht, und das Kind? But the house is cursed, and the child?" He placed his hand on her belly again, and this time Katie felt something else, a second presence, something dark that had been attached to her baby, feeding on it, growing with it. A curse that Oma had mentioned, a debt passed through blood. "Das Kind trägt die Schuld der Großmutter," the Belsnickel continued. "The child carries the grandmother's guilt. Die genommenen Seelen fordern Bezahlung. The taken souls demand payment." "No," Katie gasped. "Please, not my baby, take me. Judge me however you want, but please." "Ich richte," the Belsnickel interrupted. "I judge. Und du bist gut. Das Kind ist unschuldig, aber die Schuld ist real. You are good. The child is innocent, but the debt is real." He reached into his sack again, and this time what emerged made Katie's breath catch. It was a figure, small, translucent, almost ghostly. It took Katie a moment to recognize her from the old photographs she'd found in the attic. Hannah, Aunt Hannah, looking exactly as she had at 17, forever frozen at the moment she'd been taken. "Sie war nicht schlecht," the Belsnickel said, his voice almost sad. "She was not bad. Aber deine Großmutter hatte Angst. Sie sah Dunkelheit, wo keine war. Sie rief mich, zu richten, und ich richtete nach dem, was ich sah. But your grandmother was afraid. She saw darkness where there was none. She called me to judge, and I judged by what I saw." "What did you see?" Katie whispered. "Die Wahrheit. Hannah war schwanger, unverheiratet. Deine Großmutter dachte, das sei Sünde. Sie rief mich, damit ich das Mädchen bestrafe, ihr Angst mache, sie zur Reue zwinge. The truth. Hannah was pregnant, unmarried. Your grandmother thought this was sin. She called me to punish the girl, to frighten her, to force her to repentance. Aber ich sah kein Verbrechen. Ich sah Liebe. Ich sah ein Mädchen, das mutig war, das ihr Kind behalten wollte, obwohl die Welt sie verurteilen würde. But I saw no crime. I saw love. I saw a girl who was brave, who wanted to keep her child even though the world would condemn her. Und doch wurde ich gerufen zu richten. Also richtete ich diejenige, die mich rief. Ich nahm Hannah, aber nicht zur Strafe. Ich nahm sie, sie zu schützen, ihr und ihrem Kind einen Ort zu geben, wo sie sicher sein konnten. And yet I was called to judge. So I judged the one who called me. I took Hannah, but not for punishment. I took her to protect her, to give her and her child a place where they could be safe. The ghostly Hannah moved closer, and Katie could see that she was indeed pregnant, her belly swollen with eternal life. Deine Großmutter verstand das nie, the Belsnickel continued. Your grandmother never understood. Sie dachte, ich hätte Hannah für ihre Sünde bestraft. Die Schuld verzehrte sie. Und Schuld, die nicht vergeben wird, wird zur Krankheit. Sie legte sich auf dieses Haus, auf diese Familie, auf dein ungeborenes Kind. She thought I had punished Hannah for her sin. The guilt consumed her, and guilt that is not forgiven becomes sickness. It settled on this house, on this family, on your unborn child. Another contraction hit Katie, and she cried out. The baby was crowning. There was no more time. The Belsnickel looked at the ghostly Hannah, and something passed between them. Some communication beyond words. Then Hannah knelt beside Katie and placed her transparent hands over Katie's belly. Die Schuld muss vergeben werden, the Belsnickel said. The guilt must be forgiven. Hannah, vergibst du? Hannah, do you forgive? The ghost of Katie's aunt smiled, sad and beautiful and heartbreaking. She nodded. Und du, Katie, vergibst du deiner Großmutter? And you, Katie, do you forgive your grandmother? Katie wanted to say no, wanted to rage at the old woman who'd called this monster, who'd damned her own daughter, who'd cursed Katie's child before it was even born. But as she looked into Hannah's ghostly eyes, she saw no anger there, only peace, only love, only the eternal patience of someone who'd been carrying a child for 25 years and somehow still found it beautiful. I forgive her, Katie whispered. The moment the words left her lips, something broke. Katie felt it like a physical snap, a cord of darkness that had been wrapped around her baby suddenly severing. Hannah's ghost smiled wider, her hands glowing with warm light, and then she leaned down and kissed Katie's forehead. Danke, Hannah whispered, her voice like a summer breeze. Thank you. Then she faded, finally released, finally at peace. The baby came in a rush, too fast, too hard, but the Belsnickel was there with his strange cold hands that somehow knew exactly what to do. He caught the child, cleared her airway, wrapped her in the clean cloth he'd brought. When he laid the baby on Katie's chest, the infant was screaming, healthy and strong and furiously alive. A girl. Katie had a daughter. The Belsnickel stood, gathering his switches and his sack. The sack was empty now, all the stolen souls released by Hannah's forgiveness. He looked down at Katie and her newborn daughter with those ancient, inhuman eyes. Du bist gut, he said again. You are good. Und deine Tochter wird gut sein. Die Schuld ist bezahlt. Die Linie ist gebrochen. And your daughter will be good. The debt is paid. The line is broken. He turned to leave, but Katie called out, Wait, what was Hannah's baby? Did it survive? Do I have a cousin somewhere? The Belsnickel paused at the door. Hannah's kind lebt, he said quietly. Hannah's child lives. In meiner Welt, wo die Zeit anders ist. Das Kind ist noch nicht geboren. Aber eines Tages, wenn die Schuld vollständig vergeben ist, wenn alle Linien gebrochen sind, wird es geboren werden. In dieser Welt. Und es wird eine Brücke sein zwischen dem Alten und dem Neuen. In my world, where time is different. The child is not yet born. But one day when the guilt is fully forgiven, when all lines are broken, it will be born. In this world. And it will be a bridge between the old and the new. Then he was gone, dissolving into the winter darkness like snow in spring rain. The ambulance arrived 20 minutes later, shocked to find Katie and the baby stable and healthy, if traumatized. David arrived an hour after that, and they took mother and daughter to the hospital for a proper examination. Both were mysteriously fine, better than fine. The doctors called it a miracle. Katie never told anyone the full story. How could she explain? But she kept Oma's journal, and every December 6th, she leaves an offering outside her door. Not from fear, but from respect. Bread and salt and a switch of birch wood bound with red ribbon. Because the Belsnickel still judges, still walks, still separates the good from the bad. But Katie understands now what Oma never did. That judgment is not the same as condemnation. That sometimes the monster knows mercy better than we do. That sometimes being taken is not punishment, but salvation. And on December 6th each year, when Katie tucks her daughter into bed, she tells her a story. Not the scary version of the Belsnickel, but the true one. The one about the spirit who sees into hearts, who weighs souls, who punishes the wicked and protects the good. Bist du gut oder schlecht? Katie asks her daughter, the ritual question. And her daughter, bright-eyed and fearless, always answers, Gut, Ich bin gut. Good. I am good. Because she is. Because forgiveness broke the curse. Because the Belsnickel judged, and the judgment was mercy. Outside, in the winter darkness, something moves through the snow, tall and wrapped in furs, carrying switches and an empty sack. The Belsnickel walks his eternal rounds, visiting houses where the old ways are remembered. And in those houses, children sleep soundly, knowing that truth sees everything, and truth, when met with courage, has nothing to fear. The Belsnickel comes, and the good are safe. Husband to Barcelona for their first Christmas together, she knew she'd have to explain some things. Spain did Christmas differently. The gift-giving happened on January 6th for the Three Kings, not December 25th. Dinner was late and elaborate, and then there were the traditions that made no logical sense whatsoever, the kind that made foreigners laugh or stare in bewildered confusion. "So let me get this straight," Ryan said, looking at the small wooden log with a painted face that Marta's mother had just placed prominently in the living room. "You feed a log, you put a blanket on it to keep it warm, and then on Christmas Eve you beat it with sticks while singing a song that roughly translates to shit log shit?" Marta's mother, Rosa, laughed at Ryan's expression. "El Caga Tió," she said proudly, patting the log like it was a beloved pet. "It's Catalan tradition. The children feed him every night, bread, fruit, water. We keep him warm. And on Christmas Eve, he poops out presents for good children." "Poops," Ryan repeated slowly. "See, poops. You lift his blanket, and there are gifts underneath. Magic." Rosa's eyes twinkled with amusement at Ryan's obvious discomfort with the scatological nature of the tradition. Marta squeezed her husband's hand. "I know it's weird, but it's sweet in its own way. Kids love it. My brother and I used to fight over who got to feed the Tió every night." What Marta didn't mention, what she'd almost forgotten until she saw her childhood Tió sitting in her mother's living room, was the year the tradition went wrong, the year her brother Javier disappeared. That night, alone in Marta's childhood bedroom, Ryan couldn't sleep. Jet lag and the strangeness of being in a foreign country for the holidays kept him awake. Around 2 a.m., he heard something from downstairs, a rustling sound like fabric moving, and underneath it something else, something that sounded disturbingly like chewing. He crept downstairs, careful not to wake anyone, and followed the sound to the living room. The Caga Tió sat exactly where Rosa had left it, wearing its little red blanket like a cape, its painted face smiling benignly in the darkness. The plate of food they'd left for it, bread and orange slices, was empty. "Probably rats," Ryan muttered to himself, though he didn't quite believe it. He turned to go back upstairs and nearly collided with someone standing in the doorway. Marta's Aunt Lucia, her mother's older sister, stood in a nightgown, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. She looked at Ryan, then at the Tió, then back at Ryan. "You heard it eating," she said. Not a question. The food's gone. It was probably—" "It eats," Lucia interrupted, her voice flat. "It has always eaten. But in the old days, we knew what to feed it. We knew how to keep it satisfied. Now," she shook her head, "now we pretend it's a children's game. We pretend we're in control." Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. "It's just a log." "Is it?" Lucia moved closer to the Tió, studying it with an expression Ryan couldn't read. "Then why does it eat? Why does the food disappear every single night, no matter how carefully you watch? Why do some families stop the tradition suddenly and refuse to speak about why?" "Lucia." Rosa's voice came from the stairs, sharp with warning. "Es tarde. Vete a dormir." "It's late. Go to bed." But Lucia ignored her sister, keeping her eyes fixed on Ryan. "Ask your wife about Javier. Ask her what really happened the Christmas he was 7. Lucia. Rosa's voice was angry now. Basta! The old woman smiled sadly, then shuffled back toward her room. Rosa descended the stairs, her face pale in the dim light. She looked at the empty plate, at the Tió, and for just a moment, Ryan saw fear flash across her features. Mi amor, go back to bed, she said quietly. The Tió is just tradition, just a game for children, nothing more. But Ryan noticed she didn't look at the log when she said it, and she gathered the empty plate quickly, almost frantically, as if afraid of what else might be gone by morning. The next day, Ryan asked Marta about Javier. She stiffened immediately. He's been gone a long time, she said carefully. They were walking through the Gothic quarter, ostensibly Christmas shopping, but Ryan could tell she was avoiding going back to her mother's apartment. Gone where? He left when he was 17, just left. We haven't heard from him in 15 years. She stopped in front of a shop window, pretending to study the display, but Ryan could see her reflection was troubled. Why are you asking? Your aunt said something strange last night. She mentioned something that happened when he was 7. Marta was quiet for a long moment. Then, let's get coffee. There's something I should probably tell you. They sat in a small cafe, and Marta wrapped her hands around her cup like she was trying to draw warmth from it, even though the cafe was overheated and stuffy. When Javi was 7 and I was 10, something happened with the Caga Tió, she began. It was Christmas Eve. We'd been feeding it for 2 weeks like always, bread, fruit, nuts, keeping it warm with its blanket. We were so excited because we knew that night we'd get to do the song, hit it with sticks, and find presents underneath. She took a sip of coffee, her hands shaking slightly. But that year, Javi had been difficult. He was going through a phase, lying a lot, stealing small things from kids at school, being cruel to the neighbor's cat. My parents were worried about him. They'd taken him to a child psychologist. That night we did the tradition. The whole family gathered around the Tió. Javi and I had our sticks. We started singing the song, Caga Tió, Caga Toro, shit log, shit nougat. It's supposed to be funny, playful. But when Javi hit the log, she paused, her face going pale at the memory. It screamed. What? The log screamed. This horrible, high-pitched sound like wood splitting, but also like something in pain. Everyone froze. We thought maybe it was some prank, some recording someone had hidden. But then the Tió moved. Ryan felt his blood go cold. Logs don't move, Marta. I know what I saw. It rocked back and forth, violent, like something was trying to get out. The blanket fell off, and underneath, Ryan, there were no presents. There was nothing. Just the hollow log and this smell, like rot and old earth. And then the mouth, the painted mouth on the log, it opened. That's not possible. I'm telling you what happened. The mouth opened and something came out. Not presents, not candy. Something dark and liquid, like oil or blood, pooling on the floor. And in that puddle I saw images, reflections of things that weren't in the room. I saw Javi, but not the Javi standing next to me. I saw another Javi, older, twisted, doing terrible things, hurting people, killing. Marta's voice dropped to a whisper. The Tió was showing us what he would become, what was inside him, the darkness that the psychologist couldn't see yet, but that was there, growing. What happened then? My father grabbed both of us, pulled us away. The log stopped moving. The liquid disappeared, just soaked into the floor and was gone. Everyone was shouting, confused. My mother was crying, and Javi. She closed her eyes. Javi just stood there, staring at the log with this expression. Not scared, curious, hungry, almost. We never did the Caga Tió tradition again after that. Not in our house. My parents threw that log away, burned it in the fireplace. But Javi changed after that night. Got worse. The lying got more sophisticated. Things went missing from neighbors' houses. A classmate's dog died under suspicious circumstances, and Javi started having nightmares, or at least we thought they were nightmares. He'd wake up screaming about being hungry, about needing to feed. When he was 17, he left, just disappeared one night with no note, no explanation. The police investigated but found nothing. My parents assumed he'd run away, maybe fell in with bad people. But Aunt Lucia... Marta looked at Ryan with haunted eyes. Lucia thinks the Tió took him, that it showed us his darkness because it wanted him, that all the years of feeding it, of giving it offerings, we'd been making it strong enough to take what it really wanted. And what does it want? Not presents to give, presents to take. Children, specifically children with darkness inside them. Children who are cruel or broken or wrong in some way that normal people can't detect yet. The Tió can see it. And on Christmas Eve, if it's been fed well enough, if it's strong enough, it doesn't shit out gifts. It swallows up the children it's been watching. Ryan stared at his wife. You can't actually believe this. I don't know what I believe. All I know is that my brother is gone, and my mother still keeps a Caga Tió in the house every Christmas, and every morning the food is gone. She's feeding something, Ryan, and I'm terrified to find out what. They didn't talk much for the rest of the day. Ryan wanted to dismiss it as childhood trauma, imagination, repressed memories distorted by grief. But that night, he woke again to the sound of eating. And this time, when he went downstairs, he saw it. The Tió's painted mouth was moving, opening and closing in slow, deliberate movements as it consumed the bread on the plate in front of it. There was no mechanism, no trick. The painted wood was simply moving, chewing, swallowing. Ryan stood frozen in the doorway, unable to process what he was seeing. The log finished the bread, then seemed to sense his presence. The painted eyes, just simple black dots on wood, swiveled toward him. And Ryan heard a voice, dry and ancient, speaking in Catalan that he somehow understood. Tinc gana. I'm hungry. He stumbled backward, nearly falling, and scrambled back upstairs. Marta was awake, sitting up in bed as if she'd been waiting for him. You saw it, she said quietly. He could only nod. My mother feeds it every year, hoping Javi will come back. She thinks if she keeps the tradition, if she keeps it satisfied, maybe it will return him. But it won't. It never does. The Tió only takes. It never gives back. We need to destroy it, Ryan said. Burn it, break it, get it out of this house. We can't. My mother would never allow it. And even if we did... Marta pulled her knees up to her chest, looking small and frightened. There are hundreds of Caga Tiós in Barcelona right now, thousands across Catalonia. Every family with children has one. They're in stores, in schools, in public squares. If one is destroyed, if one is denied, does it die? Or does it just move to another log, find another family to feed it? The next morning, Rosa was preparing for Noche Buena, Christmas Eve. The house smelled of roasting meat and cinnamon, and relatives were arriving throughout the day. Children ran through the house, excited, their laughter echoing off the old walls. And in the corner of the living room, the Caga Tió sat waiting, its painted smile seeming wider than before. Rosa had arranged the sticks decoratively beside it, 3 of them, carved wood worn smooth from years of use. Ryan noticed something he hadn't before. There were marks on the sticks, not decorative carvings, scratches, deep gouges that looked almost like teeth marks. Tia Rosa, he said carefully. How old is this Tió? Rosa looked up from the kitchen, her expression guarded. It's been in the family a long time. How long? She didn't answer, turning back to her cooking. But Lucia, sitting in the corner with a glass of wine, spoke up. It was our great-grandfather's, brought from a village in the Pyrenees, carved from a tree that grew in a very old forest, a place where people still remembered the even older traditions, before Christianity, before the Romans, when winter meant death and survival meant sacrifice. "Lucia, por favor," Rosa said warningly. But the old woman continued, her voice taking on the rhythmic quality of a story told many times. The Caga Tió wasn't always a children's game. In the very old days, it was a test. Families would take a log from the sacred forest and bring it into their homes. They would feed it, care for it, treat it like a member of the family. And on the longest night, they would strike it with sticks to see what it had become. If the family was good, if the children were kind, and the parents were just, the log would give them gifts, food for the winter, good fortune, blessings. But if there was rot in the family, if there was cruelty or evil hiding beneath the surface, the log would reveal it, and then it would consume it. Take away the corrupted piece before it could poison the whole. "That's barbaric," Ryan said. Lucia smiled without humor. "Is it, or is it practical? A village couldn't afford to feed and shelter someone who would grow up to be a murderer or a thief. Resources were scarce, survival was difficult. So the Tió tested, it judged, and it removed the darkness before it could spread." "Javier wasn't dark," Rosa said suddenly, her voice breaking. "He was just troubled, just a difficult child. The Tió was wrong." "Was it?" Lucia's voice was gentle but firm. "Rosa, mi hermana, I loved that boy too. But you know what the police told you years later, the things they suspected him of, the evidence they found linking him to Caga." "Shut up." Rosa was crying now. "I don't want to hear it. He was my son, my baby, and that thing took him." The room fell silent. The children, sensing the tension, had stopped playing. One of them, a little boy no more than 6, walked over to the Caga Tió and stared at it with unusual intensity. "It's hungry," the boy said matter-of-factly. "It told me. It wants to eat soon." His mother rushed over, pulling him away. "Marty, don't say such things. It's just a toy." But Marty kept staring at the log. "It's not a toy, and it knows which ones are bad. It can taste it when we feed it. It tastes our fingers when we touch it. And it knows." The boy's mother hurried him out of the room, embarrassed, apologizing. But Ryan saw that everyone else was looking at the Tió now, really looking at it, perhaps for the first time in years, seeing not a cheerful tradition, but something older and stranger and infinitely more patient. That night, the family gathered for the traditional ceremony. The children were lined up with their sticks, taught the song, encouraged to hit the log so it would poop out presents. But there was a tension in the air that hadn't been there in previous years. Even the children seemed nervous, their laughter forced. Ryan stood with Marta, holding her hand tightly. He'd suggested they leave, go to a hotel, but she'd refused. "We can't abandon my mother, not tonight. Not with all these children here." The song began. "Caga Tió, Caga Tió, avellanes y mato." The children hit the log with their sticks, gigging nervously. Rosa lifted the blanket to reveal the presents underneath, wrapped candies and small toys that she'd obviously placed there earlier. The children cheered, grabbing their treats. The adults laughed with relief. The tradition had worked. Nothing went wrong. It was all fine. But as the family moved to the dining room for dinner, Ryan stayed behind. He approached the Caga Tió, crouching down to look at it more closely. The painted face was the same, simple, cartoonish, harmless. But the wood around the mouth was darker than the rest of the log, stained. And when Ryan looked very carefully, he could see that the hollow inside the log went deeper than should be possible. Much deeper. "Tink Ghana," the voice came again, barely a whisper. "I'm hungry." "What are you hungry for?" Ryan whispered back, feeling insane for talking to a log. "El mal, la foscor, el que es podrit." The evil, the darkness, that which is rotten. "There's no evil here. These are just children." "Sempre hi ha mal," sempre hi ha foscor. En alguns es petit, una llavor que mai no creixerà. En altres es una arrel profunda, esperant florir. There is always evil, there is always darkness. In some it is small, a seed that will never grow. In others it is a deep root waiting to bloom. And you eat it? You remove it? Consumatio. I consume. Es el meu propòsit. La meva gana es eterna, perquè la foscor es eterna. I quan m'alimenteu crec fort, prou fort per veure, prou fort per agafar. It is my purpose. My hunger is eternal, because darkness is eternal. And when you feed me, I grow strong, strong enough to see, strong enough to take. What did you see in Javier? The log was silent for a long moment. Then, preguntan a la teva dona què li va fer el seu germà. Pregunta-li sobre les cremades alemans, sobre el gos mort, sobre la nena de la classe que va caure per les escales. Ask your wife what her brother did to her. Ask her about the burns on her hands, about the dead dog, about the girl in class who fell down the stairs. Ryan felt sick. Where is he now? Dins, sempre dins, els que consumeixo viuen al meu centre, al meu foscor, alimentant-me, convertint-se en part de mi. La seva foscor em fa fort perquè pugui trobar més. És el cicle. Inside, always inside. Those I consume live in my center, in my darkness, feeding me, becoming part of me. Their darkness makes me strong so I can find more. It is the cycle. That's evil. You're evil. Soc necessari. I am necessary. En un món on la foscor pot créixer lliure, on els monstres poden amagar-se darrere de somriures, algú ha de veure, algú ha de consumir, algú ha de protegir els bons dels dolents. In a world where darkness can grow freely, where monsters can hide behind smiles, someone must see, someone must consume, someone must protect the good from the bad. By eating children? Per consumir la foscor, abans que consumeixi els altres. By consuming the darkness before it consumes others. Ryan stood, backing away from the log. He understood now why families continued the tradition even when they knew or suspected what it really was. Because as horrifying as it was to feed something that might take your child, wasn't it more horrifying to raise a child who would grow up to be a monster? Wasn't it more terrifying to have darkness hiding in your home, in your family, in your blood, and not know until it was too late? The Caga Tió was a test, a judgment, a necessary evil in a world full of unnecessary ones. But Ryan couldn't accept it, wouldn't accept it. There has to be another way, he said. Help, therapy, intervention. We don't need monsters to judge our children. I encara creixen els monstres, and yet monsters still grow. En cases amb amor, en famílies amb riquesa, amb tota la teràpia del món, perquè la foscor no ve de fora, neix de dins, i jo soc l'únic que pot veure-la abans que sigui massa tard. In houses with love, in families with wealth, with all the therapy in the world, because darkness doesn't come from outside. It is born from within, and I am the only one who can see it before it's too late. Ryan didn't have an answer. He returned to the dining room, where the family was eating and laughing, the children happy with their candy, the adults relieved that another Christmas had passed without incident. But Ryan noticed Rosa watching the children, all of them, but especially young Marty, who'd said the Tió was hungry. Watching with a grandmother's love, but also with something else. Fear, vigilance, the exhausting weight of wondering if the darkness might be lurking in one of these bright young faces, waiting to emerge. Later that night, as they lay in bed, Ryan told Marta what the Tió had said. She was quiet for a long time, then rolled up her sleeves. In the dim light, he could see the scars on her forearms, old burns, faded, but still visible. Javi did this when I was 9, held my arms over the stove burners. He said he wanted to see how long I could stand it, My parents found us, stopped him, but they never understood what it meant. They thought it was an accident, that he was playing and it went too far. She pulled her sleeves back down. There were other things, so many other things, and I was relieved when the T.O. took him. Is that evil? Is that darkness? To be glad that my brother disappeared because I was finally safe? No, Ryan said firmly. That's survival. The T.O. could have taken me instead. I had that thought, that relief that he was gone, that dark, selfish relief. Maybe that's the kind of thing it consumes. Maybe I was next. But it didn't take you. No, because my darkness was small, a seed that would never grow like it said. But Javi's... She shuddered. The police came to our house 3 years after he disappeared. They'd found evidence linking him to the disappearance of a young girl from his school, the one who fell down the stairs. She didn't fall. They found her body. What was done to her? Marta's voice broke. He was only 17 when he disappeared, Ryan. 17, and he'd already killed. What would he have become if the T.O. hadn't taken him? Ryan had no answer. He held his wife as she cried, and he thought about the log downstairs, still hungry, still waiting, still serving its ancient purpose in a world that pretended such purposes weren't necessary. The next morning, they left Barcelona. Rosa understood, or seemed to. She hugged them both, pressed a small package into Marta's hands. For when you have children, she said quietly, so you can keep them safe. In the car, driving to the airport, Marta opened the package. Inside was a small Caga Tió, just a few inches long, carved from dark wood, with a simple painted face. We're not using that, Ryan said immediately. Marta stared at the little log. What if we have a child and there's darkness in them? What if we can't see it? What if we raise a monster and don't know until they've hurt someone? We'll love them. We'll pay attention. We'll get help if they need it. We'll do everything human parents have always done. And if that's not enough? Ryan didn't answer because he didn't know. None of them knew. That was the terrible truth, that children were unknowable, that darkness could hide anywhere, that love wasn't always enough to save someone from themselves. Marta put the little T.O. in her bag. Just in case, she whispered. Just in case. And every December after that, in their home in America, far from Barcelona and its ancient traditions, Marta would take out the little log. She'd place it in a corner, cover it with a cloth, leave out a plate with a few crumbs of bread. Just in case. Because the Caga Tió was patient, the Caga Tió was eternal, and the Caga Tió was always hungry, because darkness was always growing, always waiting, always ready to bloom in the most unexpected hearts. Feed it, and it grows strong enough to protect you. Starve it, and you're on your own. And in a world full of monsters wearing human faces, maybe, just maybe, we need a monster of our own to keep them in check. On Christmas Eve, Ryan would hear his wife downstairs singing softly in Catalan. Caga Tió, Caga Toro, shit, log, shit, nougat. The song of a tradition that should have been whimsical but instead was a prayer, a plea, a bargain with something dark and necessary and utterly unchristian. And in the morning, the food would be gone, always gone. The T.O. was fed, the T.O. was watching, and their future children, when they came, would be tested, judged, protected or consumed depending on what grew in their hearts. Because some Christmas traditions aren't about joy or giving or peace on earth. Some Christmas traditions are about survival, about doing what must be done, no matter how dark, to keep the darkness at bay. And the Caga Tió, patient and hungry and eternal, would always be there, waiting, watching, ready to consume the rot before it could spread. Shit, log, shit. Give us candy and nougat. If you don't want to shit, we'll hit you with a stick. Unless you're hungry for something else. Unless you smell darkness. Unless you decide the gift you give is the taking away, then the stick won't save us. Nothing will, except maybe feeding you, keeping you strong, and praying that when you open your wooden mouth, it's to give presents, not to swallow our children whole.